ever since people started asking me, what do you mean by free speech? It comes with 4 commonsensical caveats, exceptions. The first is you cannot reveal state secrets in the name of free speech. Obviously you can't. The second is you cannot shout fire in a crowded theater, because if you do in the name of free speech, you physically endanger the lives of others. Third is you cannot incite a crowd palpably and in real time so that it indulges in violence, because again, physical harm. And the fourth is you can you can generalize and make a statement slandering someone, but you can't be specific about it, because then it goes into the realm of defamation. So for example, Khalid, you can say, Anand, you're corrupt. Fine. I'll say, what is corruption? Corruption, moral hai, ethical hai. But you can't say, Anand, you took $6 million from Adani. Then I'll sue you, because then my reputation is at stake. My career is at stake. So with these 4 exceptions, everything else should be kosher.
Hi, this is Khalid Beg, and welcome to yet another episode of India This Week by Amana and Khalid. Today, the man we are joined by, I do not need to introduce him, is Takia Kalam, as you would say. Give me 30 seconds is something like, national. Anybody who follows current affairs knows where it comes from. So one and only Dr. Anand Ranganathan, arguably one of the most popular intellectual influencers of this generation. Welcome, Dr. Anand Ranganathan.
शुरू में ही गाली दे दी खालिद इंटेलेक्चुअल कह के कुछ और भी बोल देते
Scientist, influence, news influencer.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be on your show. And it's a pity Amana couldn't be there, but it's absolutely lovely to be on your show. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So Dr. Anand Ranganathan, I've seen so many of your podcasts, and you're there all over the internet. You and Abhijit are like the most famous, influencers right now. So, but there's this one question which I've seen nobody asks you, and since I follow you on Twitter, there is this lovely tweet you make once a year, celebrating your beloved late mother and speaking about her, the scientist she was and all. So I want you to speak a little about her.
Yeah, well, thank you. It used to be very painful remembering her because the way she passed away, my dear mother, because of breast cancer. And in fact, she knew she's got it, but at that point of time, my father was barely recovering from tuberculosis of the brain. So she didn't inform anyone. And by the time my father had recovered reasonably, the cancer in my mother had spread. Of course, we got the surgery done, and but 4 years later, it came back, and it was very painful. So those memories were very cruel and painful, at least for a decade and a half. It's taken that long, and I suppose it's not unusual. I think increasingly so in a lot of Indian families, there are people who've suffered cancer, and there are near and dear ones who've lost lost a battle to cancer. But still, it's very, very difficult to come to terms with it. It's taken me very long. But I think with time, I thought I should really celebrate, what my mother was all about, the sacrifices she made. And, she was a scientist at a time, or in a time where there were very few women scientists, and they were kind of actively discriminated against. There was very little one could do about it. And despite that, her enormous contributions were ignored. And, she was, as I said, she was not selected in many of the things that she should have been in time. But she always took it in stride, principally because she always said, the greatest pleasure that I have anybody, can give me is that I'm allowed to work opposite, her husband, my father. They sat opposite each other for 35 years, in the lab. And it's one of those greatest sights. So it's just one of those wondrous things that I'm so blessed to be their son. And I just thought along the way, I weighed it, the cruelty and coming to terms with it, versus celebrating very rarely, because it still rankles, it still hurts, the cruelty of this disease. But yeah, so once a year, you're absolutely right. She passed away on her birthday, on her 60th birthday. And her contributions were just absolutely remarkable. I mean, 16 papers in JACS, Journal of American Chemical Society, where one paper can fetch you everything a scientist could get in terms of awards and recognition. She had 16. She didn't get the awards that anybody who had one got it. My father, interestingly, had one paper in JACS, and he got the India's highest scientific honor. My mother had 16. But as I said, I mean, at the end of the day, she did what she loved to do most. And I think she was truly an inspiration for me. So you're right. I do remember my dear mother once a year.
So I think that is where your own scientific bent of mind and pursuit for scientific excellence comes from.
Yes, pursuit is the right word. I'm not saying that I've excelled in, or been anyway close to what my parents achieved, but yeah, I mean, striving and pursuit is the right word for it, Khalid. And yeah, I mean, I grew up essentially in the lab, because my parents would work 15, 16 hours in the laboratory, and we would often sleep in the lab, because if there were power cuts, then there was an instrument called NMR. So NMR room, the AC was always on. So instead of going home for sleeping, we would sleep in the NMR room in the lab. Our dinners were prepared by my father using the lab oven, where TLC plates used to dry. So God knows how many silica toppings pizzas I've had. But it was all great fun. It was absolutely great fun. I could see chemistry in action. And I think right from class 7th, I just knew I have to pursue chemistry. And I did. But then for my PhD, I switched to biology. But yeah, it's very close. So, I mean, I knew all along what I have to be.
Right. So, I mean, fair to say that science is your first love.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. But, today the image of Dr. Anand Ranganathan is this news analyst, who has these very powerful rational arguments. Very few people know I wouldn't like, both is your field of domain now, but your actual work is in research and the kind of wonderful, things you do at JNU, So if you could brief the viewers a little about that, because it's all hidden behind your larger than life persona now. So some things which you've done in the last 1 year, some discoveries, inventions, if you could just talk about.
Yeah, so I have a lab in JNU that I run. I have 9 students, wonderful students. They are the ones who do all the work, and it's a lab that is functioning only because I love collaborating, and I've been blessed with some incredible collaborators all through my journey in research. That's now almost 24, 25 years old. I mean, lately I'm collaborating with Professor Shailja Singh. She's a professor at my center, SCMM, and she's an expert in malaria. I am not an expert in anything. I love dabbling in stuff, and I just love to discover things. And along the way, if the more the merrier, anybody joins in. Professor Govardhan Das also is my collaborator. He's an incredible immunologist, and so many others. And every paper that has come out of my lab, I'm blessed with having collaborated with at least 3, if not 4, sometimes more labs. And I think that, and I love that, because I think science cannot be conducted in isolation anymore. Those days where 200 years ago, people would set up their laboratories in garages and, just work and discover things. Those days are long gone. I mean, now you need very sophisticated instrumentation facilities. You need experts who are in various fields that are so interconnected and fused together that even in the domain of biology, you would need physicists, you would need structural biologists, you would need so many other, experts. So it's one of those things that 9 to 5 gives me real pleasure, and I like to keep it that way. But of course, having said that, I think anyone pursuing just one domain, it can get pretty sometimes tedious, the drudgery of it. It can get boring as well. I mean, it's and I often mock at myself that writing an article of 1,000 words might take a day, and you get it published, but writing a paper of 1,000 words can take 4 years, So that's but that's the beauty of it. And I'm very lucky, very blessed with my collaborators, with my university, that I can think of an idea that is worth pursuing and then pursue it. And we've had very good success lately in the field of malaria and tuberculosis. So our laboratory is involved in techniques that are of particularly or specifically of directed evolution, and whereby we want to generate small entities, drug-like entities that would inactivate some essential molecules and proteins and peptides and enzymes of these pathogens. But we've made one interesting difference, that whereas a lot of drugs, they act against these pathogens by binding to the proteins of these pathogens. Thereby, they may act very well for a couple of years, even more. But sooner or later, these bugs develop resistance to it. They change those enzymes so that the drugs cannot bind to them. So we've decided to look at human proteins that aid these pathogens. So over time, over co-evolution of millions, possibly 1 billion years, hosts have evolved with these pathogens. And the pathogens like the malaria parasite or tuberculosis mycobacterium have usurped and sequestered many of our human proteins to aid them, to aid invasion processes, to aid sustenance inside the host, invasion inside the cell, things of that sort. So we thought, if we attack those human proteins that help these bacteria and viruses and parasites, then by virtue of those proteins not belonging to these pathogens, they will not be able to change them to develop resistance against it. So we've got limited success in that. We're very happy about it. Yeah.
That's a very unique idea, striking at the root cause. Wonderful. All the best. I hope, you get a lot of success. Tangentially related, I'm slowly coming to politics now. Yeah. How has the funding, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, been of the current regime when it's come to science and research? What have been the figures, and has previous regime invested more, or what's been this?
So it's one of those things where, if we talk of basic and fundamental science, as opposed to space science, right, where Prime Minister is directly in charge of the Department of Space. So there the funding has zoomed like a rocket has shot off, and we've seen the spectacular results. So nobody can blame that ISRO required that funding, and space research requires that funding, absolutely. But away from space science, the funding has remained more or less the same that the UPA was giving. It's about 0.6% of our GDP, if I'm not mistaken. I'm quoting 2022 figures. It's the lowest amongst all BRICS nations, and of course, certainly lower than many Western countries, lower than China, lower than South Korea. So yes, it remains a problem. I think one of the basic differences between India's funding, and I'm just including government and non-government private player funding, is that the private players haven't really pitched in to the extent that they do in other countries where the R&D budget is much more. So, and I think that is increasing now. That possibly increased, or I think the example was shown during COVID, when we had Bharat Biotech, and I don't think the Serum Institute invested that much in R&D. I mean, they got the vaccine from outside, the Oxford AstraZeneca, and they just made it. But I think the template was set and the example was set. So I think it augurs well for the future that private players, private companies should come and invest more in R&D. And I think they've started to do it. But still, it's nothing compared to Western countries or even China.
So my next question again now would be political, because most of the guests would want to know on those fronts. So the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, what are 3 things that you particularly, let's say, like or admire? and say 2 things you would want him to work on.
Okay. So what I like about him is that he is fulfilling the promises that are not in his manifesto, but in the opposition's manifestos.
What is that?
And I think I like that about him. So I would say if you were to look at the 10 most momentous decisions of Narendra Modi or plans to implement it, they were all promises made by the Congress, by the TMC, by AAP. The most prominent amongst them were the farm reforms. All the 3 farm reforms were almost verbatim in the Congress manifesto. In fact, they were harsher there. The Congress wanted to completely remove the APMC, the government mandis, whereas Narendra Modi said we will provide a choice. The farmers can either go to the government marketplace or the private marketplace. And I think, so that's one, he's acted on things. He's not been able to push them through. I think, I don't know why. That is certainly, I would say it's a weakness because he has a majority government. You would expect the way he's acted is if he was running a coalition government, then certainly you have this so-called, the infamous quote of Manmohan Singh, coalition dharma. But here you have a majority government. I was about to say majoritarian government. But then I realized, and I think the delivery aspect of it, the final mile, as they say, he's just been really good at it. He and many of his ministers, if you were to talk of Nitin Gadkari, I don't consider him a human at all. He's an alien, I've said, because
I'm a Gadkari fanboy.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible for a human to, kind of produce the kind of results that Gadkari has. Half the highways he's built in the last 8 years that we had built in 60 years and I mean, it's just unbelievable. So, but even if you, move away from Gadkari, there are some very, very good ministerial team, core team that he has. He has not fulfilled the promises that I would have loved him to have fulfilled. The 2 major promises was that he said the government has no business to be in business. In the last 9 years, he's not privatized anything other than Air India. And whatever has been disinvested, a PSU has bought the disinvestments, so it's just transferring the junk family silver from one pocket to the other. So that's like pulling wool in people's eyes. But delivery, for example, toilets, 120 million toilets, gas cylinders, 170 odd million gas cylinders, and Ayushman cards, tens of millions of Ayushman cards, now tap water connections. So I think in the back of Jan Dhan accounts, in the back of his mind was, I think many people don't give a lot of emphasis to, I think it was 2008, 2009 speech that he gave where he said, I'm going to construct a nano class. Nobody had an idea what a nano class is. It's like the lowest strata, socioeconomic strata for society. And then there used to be middle class, So he said, I'm going to make something in between where, you don't have to fight and, vie for all these amenities that I'm going to give you. All the issues, Khalid, that we talk about, that I talk about in my book, are issues that do not worry majority of Indians today, because they are more worried about where their next meal is going to come from. They're more worried about tap water coming into their houses, electricity, toilets, health, out-of-pocket expenses can make, I think, 70% people go bankrupt in our country. So these are the things that he's tackled, in the knowledge that if people elect him again, then he will come to the issues that worry the middle class or the lower middle class. So I think he has a long-term plan. That's what I feel. Yeah.
Now to one of your favorites, and this is an accusation or a charge by a lot of Congress supporters that you are overtly critical of Raga.
Of Raga.
Anything that you see positive in him, or it's like there's nothing that at all?
Yeah, I actually, no, honestly, I don't. I don't see very much positive in him. Otherwise, I would love people to tell me. what the positives are. He's been lying through his teeth. He's a hypocrite number one. As I said, the biggest hypocrisy was when he turned against the farm laws, very farm laws that he had promised he would bring through the Congress manifesto. I mean, if you do that, and if you talk of, for example, CAA, it was a Congress resolution to give citizenship rights to Bangladeshi minorities. Now, they are obviously non-Muslims. Bangladeshi minorities are non-Muslim, and Congress had promised they would give citizenship. And when Modi did that, then you suddenly turn again. So, if you're a hypocrite, if you're a liar on Rafale, he's lied, through his teeth. He's had to apologize to the Supreme Court. It's not that Congress hasn't done anything good. It's just that Raga hasn't shown himself to be a do-gooder. So, I mean, Congress has, you look at Chhattisgarh, he's done good development. It's brought people out of poverty. There has been prosperity. Rajasthan, not so much, because there is entrenched a lot of stuff that is, that's continued. That is party and government agnostic that happens in Rajasthan. But you see, you expect the opposition to win on a plank that is progressive, that is not hypocritical, that wants to take the nation forward. And this is what I mean. And I've said this before, that Modi is blessed to have the opposition the kind that he has, because his every decision that is against the national interest, and I've called Modi anti-national on many occasions, especially when he repealed the farm laws, his every anti-national step has been supported by the opposition. It's remarkable. So what kind of opposition or Rahul Gandhi is this, who doesn't want nation to progress, who goes back on his word, his manifesto? CAA, the farm reforms, the land acquisition bill, so many other things that, privatization, for example, he's against all those. And, in science, Khalid, there's one thing that you must never do is to repeat failed experiments, if otherwise you'll be called an idiot. I have not met a single scientist who takes pride in repeating failed experiments. But in politics, you're repeating them all the time, and you don't seem to be paying for the consequences. I mean, the biggest example is this old pension scheme that he's reverted to after the Congress having brought in the new pension scheme, and through Dr. Manmohan Singh and Dr. Ahluwalia, who said that reverting to the old pension scheme would be the biggest freebie you could think of. And that was Congress election plank in Himachal Pradesh. They won, So, show me something positive that Rahul has done and I will praise him. But Congress has done things that are positive, because, of course, when you're running a government, it will always be a mixed bag. And I say this again, it's just that, yes, Modi is better at delivering the last mile and, all those things. But Congress also built toilets. UPA also built, brought in electricity, water connections, gas cylinders. A lot of policies are the same. It's just that BJP is faster at developing it. That doesn't mean Congress didn't do it. So Congress did a lot of good stuff. But, when you have its leaders go back on their word, being hypocritical, then it's just appalling.
Yeah. I think Tehseen will like hearing this today.
Tehseen is a real dear friend. He's getting a lot of flack, incidentally, lately from Congress people. And he's being abused. He's been called a Sanghi. So welcome to the club, Tehseen. Because he came back, he came down really hard on, I think, Stalin Jr., saying that what kind of nonsense is he spouting. And then the Congress in charge of Tamil Nadu called Tehseen a Sanghi and, all that. So it's popcorn time for non-Congressies, I would say.
Absolutely condemnable what Stalin said. So I want to pick your brains here. See, we spoke about, there seems to be these very clear divided lines now, right? On one side, let's say you're symbolic of that, where the likes of Ravish Kumar and Arpa would say that this is Godi media. These are influencers and intellectuals who are sort of pretending to be rational, but have that inclination towards the current regime. And you guys are very clear, whether it's you, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, or J. Sai Deepak, that's the Darbari media, which has the tilt over there, but pretending to, have this charade of neutral thing and objectivity. How do you see these lines as Godi Media and Darbari Media, and what does it say about the overall thing? Because if, let's say, both do exist, then it contradicts the fact that there is no fascism. Ultimately, there is enough media space which are biased towards their respective regimes. Like, for example, Telegraph in West Bengal is as pro TMC and as big. It's like it puts Godi Media to shame. So, how do you see this Godi Media and communist media and all are existing, but all call the other as biased?
Yeah, so I'm not being patronizing towards any of these media houses, but most, if not all, have a bias. Some have pronounced bias, some have very little bias, some do what people call monkey balancing, which is that, on the pretext of showing that they are neutral, they bring in, for example, a right-winger's voice or someone who's non-left. And, the preponderance, of course, is of 10 op-eds that are written by, complete chauthi fails, as I call them, with pronounced bias. So everyone is biased, and I say I'm not being patronizing, and I'm open to people showing me cases when I am biased. Of course, I am open to anybody's, and I'm on Twitter, and it's a free, quote unquote, free country. Anybody can accuse me, and I welcome disagreements. But I personally would like to believe that I am not biased. I like to be objective. I'm not neutral, because I've said this before, to be neutral is to take sides. Switzerland was neutral during the World War II, and it helped the Nazi cause, So I never want to be neutral. I always take a position, but my position is almost always driven by science. So like that iconic, quote of, I think, I forget the film, "Main science ki taraf se." But more often than not, it's not just that I want to be my harshest judge. And anything I put out in public, I have already thought of a counterpoint to that. So I don't leave it to others to tell me that, this is a counter to it. When I put my point, I've already been my own devil's advocate. And that has helped me a lot in avoiding being a hypocrite or, thinking things through before I put it on the table. But as I said, I mean, you began, this interview with talk about my dear mother and my parents. I like to believe that pedigree holds me true to this thing that I want to be as objective as possible. And if on occasions I have not been objective, then I absolutely welcome people pointing it out. But let me tell you, I've been public eye and writing for the last 12 years now. I can't think of an occasion where somebody has objectively pointed out my bias and I have agreed to it. Not to say that I'll absolutely always disagree to it, but point to me something that I said that people felt it was biased. For example, I was against Narendra Modi on demonetization. In fact, I wrote almost 30,000 words. I called him a failure. I got a lot of flack for months on end. I got trolled, but that didn't stop me at all. I called his ministers as Confederacy of Dunces. And I was absolutely against him propping up public sector units, falling back on his promises of government not being in business. And, many of these things, 8 things that I show in my book, I have accused him directly, even in this book, and his government of not acting on these things at all when he should have. And finally, I have come down really hard on him on, the repealing of the farm laws. So for me, a person doesn't matter. As Narendra Modi himself says, he's there temporarily. वो तो फकीर है, वो तो चले जाएंगे. What matters is the country, and over and above that, the world. Because a scientist mustn't always think of India, an Indian scientist. His role, his duty is towards the entire world. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. I love that phrase. Yeah.
So on these terminologies, Godi, Darbari.
So the terminology, essentially, whenever somebody labels the other person, more often than not, it is to hide one's own embarrassment at being biased. So if somebody is biased, you would lessen the pain or realization that you are biased and subjective if you were to accuse the other person of being the same. It kind of lessens your own crime, if I can call it that. Hence the pigeonholing by almost everyone.
All
That
right.
said, there are people who are identifiably biased. And there is no harm in calling them biased, because you go by their oeuvre and you go by what they've been writing. And there are a lot of people who become biased, fair weather people. So, but almost all of them have a bias, which is very unfortunate. And I say this, there ought to be more journalism in science, but more importantly, there ought to be more science in journalism. Because when you talk about journalistic things and most of the narratives that we see now, I think you have to give, in science, what happens is you can't just publish something in isolation and say, look, I've discovered it. People will call you a fool. The first question that a scientific reader would ask is, has this been done before? Is there a prior citation for it? Now, when you talk of any grisly incident or when you provide any data, you per se, a scientist would always ask, is there prior precedence? Is there precedence of it? Has it occurred before? If yes, how many times? What is the data according to you? And in non-scientific terms, whenever you ask these questions, you immediately brand it as someone indulging in whataboutery. Oh, here he comes, he's asking about. But whataboutery exposes your hypocrisy, because, and every intelligent person has always indulged. It is almost a natural thing, because how else would you expose the hypocrisy of a person if somebody is shouting, oh my God, look, this crime has happened, right? And it is natural for you to ask, yes, but this crime happened 2 years ago and you were silent about it. Why are you shouting now? Why are you being selective? Exposing selectivity per se by definition means you have to do whataboutery. And I have written a whole article on this, starting with that Ambedkar indulged in whataboutery in his most famous instance, where Catherine Mayo wrote that book, scathing book on India and Hinduism, which Mahatma Gandhi called as the Drain Inspector's Report. And Ambedkar said, reading that Miss Mayo's book, one would be, one would believe that all the social ills are always in the Hindu society, whereas nothing could be further from the truth. They are equally there, if not more, in the Muslim society. Now, Caravan and Scroll and Wire would say, oh my God, look, here is this whatabouterer. He's talking about what about Muslim society? But what Ambedkar was doing was being objective. Because how do you solve a situation if you are not objective? You just give one side of the story. And everyone indulges in whataboutery. If you give, let's say, a fantastic economic data during the Modi regime, all those people who are accusing you of whataboutery will immediately say, oh, but under Manmohan Singh also this happened. The GDP was higher in there. So everyone is indulging in whataboutery. You have to.
I wanted to understand, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, I guess, was it 10 to 12 years back when for a brief period you were associated with Newslaundry?
Not a brief period, in fact, for 6 years.
Right. Yeah. So what was like the Dr. Anand Ranganathan of that time? Because today it's clear that it's a extreme left-leaning portal. They take a lot of not anti-government but anti-India positions. Naxalite sympathizers, Islamist sympathizers, they support every possible secessionist movement against India. Were you like us, like I was 10, 12, 15 years back, like NDTV, Caravan, this is true journalism in the world of Roy? Were you having a similar journey?
No. So I was never a leftist, absolutely. And one is free to read they're all in public domain. In fact, not only, I don't know whether they're still there on the Newslaundry portal, but I have my own domain, and all those articles that I've ever written, about 300 of those, they're all there. Newslaundry does, fish out from time to time just to berate me and call me names and abuse me. Things that I said earlier. Oh, look, this guy said, but I stand by those things. For example, I said that if I was P.V. Narasimha Rao, I would have rebuilt the Babri Masjid brick by brick till such time the Supreme Court judgment came on the thing. I'm proud of having said that, because that means I don't believe in anarchy like the left does. I don't believe in demolishing things. I believe in seeking justice. And Newslaundry lately wrote an article on me saying that he is the same guy who once said, that he would rebuild Babri Masjid. I still say it. So the bias is with them, not with me. But let bygones be bygones. I think till the time I was there, or at least very close to 80% of the time, the first 4 or 5 years, well, I really liked it. I think Miss Madhu Trehan was in charge of it. She was reasonably or very, I would say, neutral um, about it. She encouraged dissent. She encouraged this. And I think it's a lot to do with, I think, what happens over time. And this happens across ideologies, across platforms, that because Indians per se are so impulsive, the subscribers, if they read something that is out of their frame that they have constructed and they've demanded from that portal, they will simply cancel their subscription. So if tomorrow, for example, Wire or Arfa were to say something laudatory about this government, you would see 1,000 Wire subscribers say, what the heck? I mean, go to hell. I'm removing my money, you see.
Or even laudatory about India.
Yes, true. So you see what happens is, that is their subscription model. That's how they earn the money, unless they also get money from Soros and other organizations, whatever. But I mean, this is their principal chunk. Like Ravish. I mean, Ravish is earning money because he has a set constituency. And he says the things that that constituency loves. It's actually, media is mirroring politicians. Media has made these vote banks, or I call them, you can call them subscriber banks, right? And you cannot displease them. So what has happened is, most of these media portals have done this. I had pleasant experiences more often than not. And yeah, I mean, I wrote things on whatever I liked because I was never an employee. And I've said this before as well. If I was a journalist being paid for doing journalism, it's very difficult to maintain this degree of objectivity, because you have to worry about, supposing you're sacked, and there is self-censorship more often than just censorship, and which is more devastating, because then you always wrecked by the thought that you've sold your soul. Those questions never came to me because I was never being paid, a salary wherever I have contributed any of my writings. So I was very lucky in that sense. Yeah.
So tangentially related to that, of course, portals like Newslaundry or the ideological bent of mind they have, they are very much up against the idea of Hindutva, right? For them, it's the worst evil that can fall on India, and all that. Now, there are two schools of thought. People who support Hindutva say that Hindutva is needed because Hinduism, like other Abrahamic religions, doesn't have expansionist tendencies. And people with expansionist tendencies within Abrahamic faiths use that and to kind of, hit at the Hindu consciousness. And that affects Bharat and India, right? And that is, in a way, Hindutva is like is a mechanism which Hinduism needs to safeguard itself from those expansionist tendencies, and also from communism, which does not believe in nation states. The critics argue that Hindutva is something which believes in the supremacy of Hinduism over these other religions and ideologies, and it is a threat to the quote-unquote minorities. Between these two viewpoints, how do you see Hindutva?
So let me address this fascinating question in two parts. Number one, let me first talk about Hindutva and what I believe Hindutva is. Its technical definition, Twa, means it's an essence of Hinduism. So many people say, as you also rightly said, talked about, that it is more or less, it's born out of a defensive mechanism of, against predatory Abrahamic religions, that people, Hindus, should stand up and, fight for their rights. So yes, there is an element of that to it. But if you look at the 1995 Supreme Court judgment that actually talked about what Hindutva is, that was delivered by Justice Verma, who was certainly not a Sanghi. I mean, today we've kind of pigeonholed our judges also as Sanghis and Qaumis, and also he was a quote unquote liberal, left liberal dispensation. He was the one who said Hindutva is, is close to a way of life, Hinduism. It reflects that. Same was said by Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan ji. So, and a lot of other philosophers. I think the opponents of Hindutva have purposely built a false equivalence of Hindutva with this so-called political Islam or radical Islam, so that they can cushion it. Remember, I said that if somebody has a particular bias, then the easiest way to cushion that and lessen that guilt is to accuse someone else of having a bias. So likewise, if somebody is following a religion that espouses supremacy, exclusivist nature in most of its verses, that is against every other non-believer, then the tendency of the person who's following it is A, embarrassment, and B, let me cushion it, and C, how do I cushion it with? I immediately find something in other religions that I can say mirrors the expansionist or exclusivist or supremacist ideas and tenets of my own religion. So Hindutva has been propped up over the last 100 odd years as an equivalence to the so-called supremacist notions of other religions. Otherwise, I will go by what the Supreme Court said on this.
Yeah. I want to get you in there. As a rationalist, do you, I mean, not putting every religion in the same bracket, but would you say that for ultimately religion is what the believers make it, and every religion would have something which could come across irrational or some flaw which would not work in its favor? For example, if we look at the latest example at Junior Stalin's comments, at the end of the day, of course, yes, I mean, we had a podcast with Abhijit and Kushal, and they said that, he's converted, he's a Christian. Let's say, leave that aside, most of the people who he's selling this to constituents are Hindus themselves. And they very well know, because now they're upping the scale, like A. Raja has gone one step ahead, right? Where I don't even want to say what he's, said about the religion, and no religion should be talked about like that. Would you feel that somewhere that part is getting missed out, that apart from the expansionist tendencies from certain sections of Abrahamics, there are also problems within where it's the Hindu itself who is first the one to kind of, for the pursuit of power, ready to put down the religion, which of course then he'll be ably be assisted by the expansionists within the Abraham. Is that something which is not being spoken enough about?
So again, yes, it has not been spoken a lot about, principally because of our free speech laws. You see, the state is prohibiting its citizen to speak freely about religion. As far as Hinduism is concerned, before I come to the other religions, as you said, I personally don't see Hinduism as a religion. I see it principally as a way of life. Yes, there are religious aspects of Hinduism that I consider are, in Hinduism, religion is an offshoot of the way of life. Whereas in Abrahamic religions, way of life is an offshoot of religion. So it follows that in Hinduism, there have been reforms because ways of life have changed over tens or thousands of years. And it follows that anything that is stemming from the way of life would then also change. So Hinduism is adapting to the changing environment. It is mutating. There are egregious mutations. There are helpful mutations, but there are mutations. And people are accepting it. We had the Hindu Code Bill. Hindus accepted it. We had reforms on a lot of Hindu practices, that are now absolutely illegal. And of course, once the constitution was made, a lot of discriminations that occurred through the time span of 7,000, 6,000 years of Hinduism, those things have been made absolutely illegal. I talk of untouchability and, all those things, discrimination. So all those things have changed, principally because not it was consecrated as a religion, i.e. the dogma that you have to follow these rules, but because it started as a way of life, Sanatan Dharma that Stalin has criticized and A. Raja have criticized, that had the varna, not the caste. So, there were things there that were mostly pertaining to philosophy, all questioning, not worrying about whether a person should hold a belief or not. I mean, you have in Hinduism a sect that is Charvak, like Kushal Mehra is a Charvak, which encourages glorifies atheism. I mean, which religion would glorify atheism? It's like contradictory, you can leave the fold of Hinduism. You have Satyarth Prakash, Dayanand Saraswati ji. Incidentally, the attempt or the demand to ban the book Satyarth Prakash was not made by the Hindus, but actually made by Muslims. So Hindus have always welcomed this. The problem comes in hypocrisy, which is what Ambedkar warned us of. That when you keep on demonizing one religion again and again, its practices, it gives the impression to everyone else in the world that all the ills are always stemming from there. Every other religion is completely devoid of it. It is peace-loving. It loves humanity. There is no talk of killing others in it. That's the kind of thing. And what happens over time is that if you keep on, like in films, in ads, like the left does, preferentially talk only of Hinduism wanting to reform it. So there is absolutely nothing wrong in reforming and saying things that are wrong in Hinduism. Absolutely nothing. The price for apostasy in Hinduism is veneration. The person who criticized Hinduism the most, we gave him Bharat Ratna. We venerate him, Dr. Ambedkar. But what is the price for apostasy in Islam? It's death, So what happens is people are now too scared to talk about other religions, not so much Christianity, because it has had its moments of reform, centuries of reform. So in the West, people very freely criticize, Christianity. Hinduism is criticized. We've seen living examples of that recently.
Rather, I think more than criticism, that's abuse, both what Stalin and...
Yes, but, as I'm a free speech absolutist, Khalid, so it is a thin line as to what would you consider as abuse and what would you consider as criticism.
Let's say crude language.
Yes, but then again, what would you consider as crude language? Somebody might say, oh, that is such a beautifully put phrase. If you look at literature, a lot of what Salman Rushdie has said is beautiful literature. But of course, he got fatwa for it, So it's all, you immediately delve into subjectivity, That is my problem. And I am ready to accept that is my own problem, because I'm a man of black and white. I'm not a man of gray, because I think gray sprouts hypocrisy. Gray allows us to cushion the crimes of people, of religions, of ideologies, because we pick and choose the things that we like in that, And we only, so for example, gray would allow people to venerate Mao, put him on currency notes, despite the fact that he killed 63 million of his own people. So I'm not one of those, and I try and be as far removed from being gray as much as I can. Yeah.
Dr. Anand Ranganathan, you and Kushal, your good friend Kushal Mehra, are free speech absolutists, right? Is that possible in a country like ours? On a practical level, because this is the very rarest of the rare position, right? And considering the practicalities, considering, I'm sorry to come across as condescending, good population,
not at all.
Lesser evolved when it comes to taking attacks on ideas as taking attacks on them. Especially, I can be very honest, coming from the second largest community, we are like the champions in that and taking offense, So is it possible? Is this a thought ahead of its time? Because, movie makers get abused from all sides. Like somebody tells them, nahi, aapne Muslim ke sentiment, Christians sometimes come in, Sikhs sometimes come in, Hindus come. So is it possible?
Khalid, it's a beautiful question you've asked. But I would begin by saying that it's not a thought ahead of its time. It is the oldest thought man ever had, to be free, to be allowed to think what you want, to be free, to be allowed to say what you want, is the dearest of rights one can have after right to life, according to me. It is, I would say, even more precious than right to eat or right to school or right to education. Because what use is your life if you're not free? As, permit me to, quote Camus. He said, the only philosophical problem remaining now is suicide. It's so beautifully put. It's so profound that I mean, he said it in the myth of Sisyphus, and then he answered that later on. But to come back to this question, even free speech absolutism comes, and I've explained this for years, ever since people started asking me, what do you mean by free speech? It comes with 4 commonsensical caveats, exceptions. The first is you cannot reveal state secrets in the name of free speech. Obviously you can't. The second is you cannot shout fire in a crowded theater, because if you do in the name of free speech, you physically endanger the lives of others. Third is you cannot incite a crowd palpably and in real time so that it indulges in violence, because again, physical harm. And the fourth is you can you can generalize and make a statement slandering someone, but you can't be specific about it, because then it goes into the realm of defamation. So for example, Khalid, you can say, Anand, you're corrupt. Fine. I'll say, what is corruption? Corruption, moral hai, ethical hai. But you can't say, Anand, you took $6 million from Adani. Then I'll sue you, because then my reputation is at stake. My career is at stake. So with these 4 exceptions, everything else should be kosher. And unfortunately, the tragedy in our country is that the Supreme Court is not adhering to the elements that, at least in a limited way, it should adhere to, i.e. 19(1) clause 2 exists, and Supreme Court must uphold it. So as it is, we have curtailment of free speech. But even that, the Supreme Court has made a very arbitrary distinction of what isn't hate speech. And in fact, when it came up with its judgment in April 2022, incidentally, where he said that all states must immediately file a case, suo moto, against hate speech. Now, it's been a week. Tamil Nadu government hasn't filed a case against its minister. Today, it has not filed a case against this thing. So it is in direct contempt of the Supreme Court. But what I mean to say is, sorry, I digressed a little bit, but I asked Supreme Court on that day, what is hate speech according to you? If I were to use a loudspeaker and say that polytheists, i.e. Hindus, are the worst of creatures, would you say that is hate speech? Now, I have asked this question in a roundabout way to a lot of people, especially a communist, who said yes. So I said, if I were to say that Muslims are the worst of creatures, do you think I would be indulging in hate speech? And the communist said, of course you would be. You're a communal bigot. And then I quoted the verse 98:6. And then I asked him, is that hate speech? Is that communal bigotry? He said, well, let's not go along those lines. So the same is with Supreme Court. If I were to, just amplify many of these religious verses, would the Supreme Court have the courage to say that I'm indulging in hate speech? It won't. Would it ban those religious books? It won't. So there is double standard there. So when Supreme Court itself doesn't have a definition or is not willing to adhere to a definition of hate speech, what to talk of other people?
So that brings me to your bestseller right now, which is #1 on Amazon right now, Hindus in Hindu Rashtra, 8th class citizen and victims of state-sanctioned apartheid. We want to know from you, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, 5 reasons why do you think, quote unquote, the majority community of India is our 8th class citizen?
Yeah, so the genesis of this book, incidentally, is about 1.5 years old, when there were clearly discrimination. And I think that was the time people were talking of Places of Worship Act, and Vishnu Jain, my very good friend, is fighting a lot of cases. Look, Khalid, the truth is that everyone in this country, from whichever socioeconomic strata he or she comes from, has been discriminated against, has been meted out injustice, or has felt being at the rough end of the stick. Everyone, irrespective of caste, creed, religion, whatever. But then I started to discover that why is it that only Hindus, ironically the majority, ironically in a so-called Hindu Rashtra, fascist government running it, are the ones who are constitutionally, legally, educationally, and socially discriminated against. So, I mean, the most bizarre is the fact that in a democracy, Hindus aren't even allowed to approach the courts to seek justice for getting their temples back. So what kind of democracy is it that you've enacted an act that prevents somebody, a citizen of the country, from approaching a court to seek justice. If that is not fascism, I don't know what is. That is what Hindus have been denied. In which other large country do you find the majority being refugees in their own country? Do you know of Americans being refugees in America, or Brits being refugees in Britain, or Germans being refugees? But here you have 7 lakh Kashmiri Hindus being refugees in their own land, and across governments, right or left or center, you may call them, for 33 years, they've remained so, Now, that is specifically apartheid state working against the majority community. There are others. I mean, you have temple control. You have so many other instances. I talk about the RTE. I talk about constitutional or legal judgments that have gone specifically want to reform Hinduism, but they walk away when you talk of other religions. And if they do pronounce a judgment trying to reform that religion, the parliament rapidly overturns, like what happened in Shah Banu. So these are the 8 reasons that I could find watertight, where only Hindus have been discriminated against constitutionally and legally. Otherwise, everyone is discriminated against. I mean, free speech laws, for example. Yes, Hindus have suffered, but Muslims have also suffered. Muslims are also arrested when they say things, against Hinduism. Christians also. So that is agnostic, religion agnostic. But these 8 reasons are specifically targeted against Hindus.
Your critics can argue that if I say it, say from my identity, that what holds us back as a community worldwide is this victimhood mentality, where we have put the blame of all our ills on everyone else rather than taking accountability, looking at introspection, looking at reforms, and moving ahead with the times. Whether we've allowed to rent out our minds to our radical clergies, right? Would your critics say that Anand Ranganathan today, unfortunately, would be doing the same with Hindus? With Hindus, saying that there is this there is this thought that is being put out where it's being said, no, there is a fair share of genuine victimhood that you guys. How would you respond?
I mean, as I said, I welcome disagreements and criticism, but please find me someone who would say that this act, which is a real piece of, legalese, a legally enforced act, Places of Worship Act. Please, somebody can stand up and tell me if this does not discriminate against Hindus. I'm willing to do whatever that person tells me. As I said, this bars people, Hindus, specifically Hindus, from seeking justice. So how is that, if one talks about it, this discrimination, how is one playing the victimhood card? How is one playing the victimhood card if one says that 7 lakh, at that point of time, there were less than that, Hindus were driven out of their own land and they are still refugees? Is that not the reality? But of course, there is the other side that hates the truth coming out, the facts coming out. If somebody can tell me this is not a fact, I'm willing to, at least listen to that person, because, I know for a fact that that's not true. The Places of Worship Act is a legally enforceable act. It is still in place. Likewise, the RTE, likewise, the Waqf Act, likewise, so many other, things. So where is the victimhood playing here? There isn't. Having said that, there is a case where when Hindus supposedly elect a Hindu right-wing government, they expect the government to act. They don't expect the government to leave it to the other institutions to help the Hindus. For example, it is befuddling to me why the BJP has left it to the courts to either negate or abrogate the Place of Worship Act or to uphold it. It is in the power of the parliament to abrogate an act. They have abrogated 370. Why can't they abrogate Place of Worship Act? If they abrogate it and if somebody doesn't like it, then they are free to approach the court, like people who didn't like the abrogation of 370. They have approached the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is deliberating on it. But at least the politician had the power to abrogate it. Here, supposedly Hindutva government is not abrogating the most anti-Hindu, the most draconian act in living memory. So yes, there is something to be said on that account.
Right. If I were to come from an Abrahamic perspective, where I see, a problem is that the unity that you see amongst like the Muslim community, the Christian community, or even Sikhs, right? That seems to be lacking within the Hindu mind, when it comes to issues where they're supposed to be rallying behind. But the very strength, which is, diversity of thought, also becomes sort of a weakness where, then there is too much of thought floating around. Yes. How would you address that? Because therein there is no, that is irrespective of the Abrahamic being there, or, they can't grudge the Abrahamic, like say, if there are so many Christian majority countries. At the end of the day, it's a fact, right? I mean, I wouldn't want to play victim to the fact that why there are so many, right? I mean, it is what it is. So where does the nationalist Hindu, draw the sense of balance rather than just seeing that also, it's because of the other?
So that's a very interesting question, and there is no doubt about it that, generally speaking, at the risk of being accused as being as stereotyping, Hindus are divided, certainly more than other religious denominations. Having said that, you have a lot of divisions within the Muslim community as well. I mean, Shias and Sunnis, if you look at Pakistan,
fair enough.
Or within India, you have Owaisi refusing to accept that Ahmadiyas are Muslims. Right. Is that not being divided? So, right. And the fact is that Ahmadiyas were at the forefront of the partition and demand for Pakistan, and the first people outlawed in Pakistan were Ahmadiyas. So there is, people are divided. I think it is a human instinct to have a divergence of views, and I think it is Darwinian as well, because there is competition. May the best view win. May the best idea win. Let the idea go through this kind of smelter and ripen in its pure form, away from bias and subjectivity. But yes, in many of the issues, I think Hindus have been, over the last 60, 70 years, and our education system has a lot to blame for it. The brainwashing that has happened, clearly anti-Hindu agenda that has been peddled, clearly the eulogizing of people who've committed genocide, perpetrated genocide against Hindus, eulogizing of Aurangzeb, of Tipu Sultan, basically holding aloft these, evildoers as actually heroes. So much so that even Hindus have them as heroes. I mean, the sword of Tipu Sultan, we as kids used to watch it and loved watching it. It's only later on I learned the kind of atrocities that he committed, and his own words in his manifesto saying that annihilation of the Kafirs is the holy duty, things of that sort. So we ourselves have not been told the reality about, what Hindu phobes actually did in our country. So there is an element of that. Other than that, there is an element of that Hindus have been divided to the sense that they are no longer able to see, okay, let me put it this way. Our state has always been a nanny state, right? It tries to control everything. So when, for example, a state is controlling Hindu temples, majority of the Hindus don't even bother about that. They don't even know or see that as an issue. They don't see it as an issue that other religions, when they earn money through their place of worship, are channelizing that money in making their schools, their institutions, their hospitals, their orphanages, whereas Hindu temples are not being able to do that. So in the long run, it is the propagation of Hinduism that is suffering, not the propagation of other religions. But Hindus are not able to see it. Hindus feel delighted when this government spends 300 crores in making that Kashi corridor, right? That, Hindu government has done it, without realizing that that is the monthly hundi collection of one Hindu temple, right? And if you were to set that temple loose, that temple alone and its hundi collections would make hundreds of such corridors. Now, this is something that the government will not teach, because government, of course, wants Hindu temples to be under control. This information has to come, it won't come from within, but a Hindu, but it has to be a collective conscious of a community. So you are right that Muslims and Christians are very aware of what they want, but Hindus are not. Let me very briefly talk about the UCC, for example. Now, UCC is religion agnostic in one sense, right? But there are already calls from Muslim politicians of civil war that will happen if UCC comes in. That, and it's so bizarre, because at the end of the day, what UCC is trying to do is to remove the misogyny and patriarchy, is to actually, if a Muslim daughter is getting half of what a Muslim brother is getting or a son is getting, how is that all right in today's society? That must change. If a Muslim woman can be married at 12, when clearly physically her body is not adapted to that early marriage, it can cause real damage, mental, psychological, and physical. How is that right to allow it? So, and why are people threatening civil war if you remove these discriminations? So in the garb of diversity, you cannot have discrimination. And Hindus have to be certainly more aware of what the Muslims and Christians are about their community. I do accept that as a fact. Yeah.
So also, since there's so much youth you're influencing, how do you view that? Because there's so much responsibility now with you, right? You're such a powerful influencer, and let's say most.
Please.
No, I mean that's
I'm
a fact.
able to influence my better half into having a decent dinner. I think that would be a victory.
Better halves are never influenced. The whole world can be influenced. So, how do you always ensure the balance between, like, let's say, okay, you give these facts out and data, but then you also have to balance out that the extreme right doesn't take that as an attack on the very entire community of whose ideas you're challenging. Do you see yourself grappling with such questions? Because it's a tricky position, right? That, okay, I'm battling these ideas, this is the position I'm on, but at the end of the day, it's still the majority community, and it cannot come to a level where tomorrow they're just outrightly bashing everyone and anyone, right? So how do you grapple with these questions?
Actually, you can call it self-praise, but please don't, because I'm being very honest here. I have never been, I'm blessed with never having to care about this. Specifically because I was brought up on a magical comment by Barthes, a writer, who said something that I have held true to whatever I have put in public domain, either by way of speech or by way of words. And Barthes said something so profound, it's just unbelievable. He said, the birth of the reader is the death of the writer. It is so profound, because what that means is, if the writer starts worrying about, what the reader wants to read, whether the reader will be annoyed by what I write, that's the end. That's the death of the writer, So I have never worried about the brickbats or the praises that I will get. And I think people have realized it. There is a real rascal, a great friend called Cool Funny Shirt. Every time I say things that are against Modi or I criticize him, he brings out this meme with Nana Patekar saying, "Seh lenge thoda isko, Anand ko thoda seh lenge." So right wingers, thankfully, mujhe seh lete hain. And leftists, they hate anyone who has an opposite view. So I don't really care about what they think of me. But the fact of the matter is that even, I gave you a lot of examples about my criticism of this government. And I've always, whatever I feel like criticizing, I have always criticized it. I do get a lot of flack because people don't understand where I'm coming from. पहले क्या होता था कि मैं बहुत सारी flurry of tweets करता था explaining my situation, जो अब कुशल करता है. For example, being a free speech absolutist, even though the so-called fact checker, Zubair, he abused me, he has spread fake news about me. When I corrected him 4 or 5 years ago, he quietly, without apologizing, he deleted his tweet. Then I blocked him. Then he's come up with 3 or 4 other things where he said, so in one of the things I think that involved NIA, I quoted 4 newspaper articles that still have not been retracted. So my news was based on that. And then he said, look, this is spreading fake news. So, I'm not the one journalist going around collecting the news. I go by newspapers, what they say. If they are wrong, then, yes, you can accuse me of peddling news that is fake, but not generating fake news. Like that, so many. But when an FIR was filed against him for saying someone is a hate monger, I tweeted, I said, I stand with Zubair. And Khalid, for the next 1 week, I got so viciously trolled by many of them were my own friends, by a lot of right-wingers, कि देखो, ये खड़ा हो गया उसके साथ. So, पर मैं खड़ा हुआ, वो अभी 2 दिन पहले, that fellow abused me and said something, fake about me. But doing the right thing, you don't care about whether you're doing it to, help someone or, for someone else's cause or returning a favor. No, I'm doing it for my own happiness. Zubair doesn't matter. What is right is right. I will always stand up for free speech, whether it is Zubair or that rogue Prashant Bhushan, with whom I have also stood. And I've said, standing with him is like walking on hot coals, but I must stand with that fellow. Everyone, Kunal Kamra, they all hate me. They all hate me. But I don't care. मुझे गाली दो देनी है दो. उनके सपोर्ट में मुझे मेरे दोस्त गाली देते हैं. बट जब ये गाली दे देते हैं ना, मतलब दिल से तो अच्छा ही है, इन सारे राइट विंगर्स का दिल बड़ा अच्छा है, ठीक है, ये बाद में फिर भूल जाते हैं. तो फिर कहते हैं कि हाँ रंगा सर अब आ गए, अब सह लेंगे थोड़ा, एज कूल फनी शर्ट्स, वो मुझे सह लेते हैं.
Lastly, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, the last question that I want to finish it with is that, again, 2 thoughts. One, of the opposition today of India, where they blame the current regime of being anti-minorities and, saying that majoritarianism has come in, Hindutva fascism has come in. That's the opposition's view. Along with that, that's the view of a lot of our enemy countries, which is expected. And the view of the supporters and of other ally countries who are close allies of India is that India is doing really well under this regime. It's a $5 trillion economy, and we're going to go number 3 in some years. And on all parameters, India has done incredible success. And the only thing, what is irking others, is that the Hindu is a little more assertive with regards to his religious identity. And there's talk of, any atrocities on Muslims, Christians, Sikhs is humbug, and that's never going to happen because that's just not the fabric of India. Between these 2 thoughts, what is your thought?
So, okay, let me tackle this in 2 ways. One, I mean, this book itself says that it is, if at all, a community is being discriminated against, it is the Hindu community. So, if people who are saying that other communities other than Hindus are the ones discriminated against, please read this book. I will send you a copy if you don't want to spend money on this. Let me turn it around. Let me, in the last 10 years, and I was cataloging these examples because the best way to counter a propaganda, Khalid, is to provide data. That's it. Let the data speak. You don't speak. So to give you an example, when Shashi Tharoor said that we are the upholders, Congress is the upholders of free speech. If any party free speech is safe, it is in the Congress fold. And I said, what are you talking about? Aren't you ashamed of what are you even saying? And I blurted out the examples that all of us know, the emergency, Kissa Kursi Ka, Andhi. But other than that, I was lost because most of the things, even I didn't know. When we were kids, we used to eulogize Nehru as the paragon of freedom of speech and upholder of liberty and all. Then I started digging. And right now, I have a data thread of 280 instances of brutal trampling of free speech by Congress. Right from
keep
Nehru.
Updating time to time.
Keep updating, yeah. So Nehru banned 50 books, films and all that. Nehru, and Nehru is called, the paragon of free speech. So that is just data. That's not me commenting that Congress stifled free speech. It's in front of you. You don't want to believe it? That's up to you. Let us say in the last 10 years, I tell you only of instances where Muslim mobs and Muslims have lynched Dalits and Hindus, Dalits and non-Dalits. Only those, including what happened recently in Mewat, where a Muslim mob entered a hospital and segregated the patients into Muslims and non-Muslims and attacked the non-Muslims, including a 3-year-old Hindu kid. If I were to narrate only those instances, what would be the impression of the common public? It would be that India is under an Islamic attack, that Hindus are under threat. Muslims are the ones who are attacking. Is it not? That's commonsensical. So the other side over the last 10 years has been talking of only those instances where Hindu mobs have been attacking Muslims and saying, oh, this is the problem that Ambedkar warned us of selectivity. And I wrote about this the first time it happened in 2017. There is an article I've written. It's called Farooq and the Art of Selectivity.
Yeah, I
and
think
I
you're talking
named
about
that
Farooq, the
because
atheist who was killed.
that's right. That's right. Nobody talked about that. You see, he was lynched by Muslims. So many others, Ayub, in Kashmir.
DSP Arabia.
So when I was catalog, and it was very painful catalog because this is not my job. Yeah, what am I trying to do? I after some time, at least the Congress freedom of speech threat is a little bit philosophical, that you're outing the prime minister and all. This one is grisly. To collect these instances was very painful, and I said so as well. So after some time, I abandoned it because I realized that Indians have rejected this propaganda in 2019. By selecting Modi again, Indians have rejected it. So BJP did not quash this propaganda. It was left to people like us, to Swati, to so many others. All those hate trackers were so selective. They were only talking about hate perpetrated against Muslims. They were completely silent when Muslims perpetrated hate crime attacks against Hindus. So when you talk of selectivity, then I'm sorry, it kind of builds an India which is not the real true aspect of it. The truth is that there is rampant discrimination, there is rampant violence, crime against every community, against homosexuals, against lesbians, against gays, against Hindus, Muslims, Christians. Did you not see that Beabdi thing that has happened 3 or 4 times in outside Golden Temple?
Yeah.
Did that make news that Sikhs have lynched someone? There was a lady who had some sticker on and she was beaten and not allowed to go into Gurdwara. Hundreds of thousands of such instances. If I were to just pigeonhole them and amplify only the ones that have happened against where Hindus are the victims, you would go home with an impression that Muslims are the ones who are wreaking havoc in this country. That's not true, right?
Yeah.
So why do the other way around? Unless you have an agenda and a propaganda, which the left does. That's the issue.
And like I said, so you see this dying its own death also now?
It's very difficult because people, as you yourself said, most of them have a bias. So the left would continue to do this. Mm-hmm. And if somebody else points it out, then the left would accuse that person of whataboutery. So if it happens in a BJP state, the left would, talk about that crime for days on end. But for example, you know that slapping a Muslim boy incident in Muzaffarpur, even though that turned out to be part fake or whatever it was.
Even though the father said it's not a communal issue,
yes,
though it was the nephew of the father filming the entire thing.
Right. And the teacher said that I'm, I think, paraplegic, and I whatever it was. I mean, whatever the thing was, at the same instant, there were 2 Muslims who thrashed a Hindu boy for writing.
We did an episode on that.
Right. Yeah. Now, you see, if you were to amplify only one of those 2 news, you would either be doing propaganda for Muslims or propaganda for Hindus. But the truth is, there are dozens of such instances that have happened against Muslims and against Hindus. Befitting Facts had a running thread. There were at least 14 instances when Hindu children have been beaten black and blue for wearing a kalawa. Their kalawas have been cut. Rakhi, so many other instances, Now, does that mean that Muslims are, invading India and, oh my God, it's going to be Islamic Republic in 2 years' time or whatever? No. The fact is that every community is perpetrating crime and violence against every other community. So why highlight, why be selective? The moment you're selective, you are propagating a false narrative. Yeah.
But would you agree that it's an industry now? Because, in a month, in such a large country, which has the most number of religions in the world, which is the most diverse country in terms of religions, no other country is so diverse, right? All 6-7 major world faiths are here, not now, since hundreds and thousands of years. So out of 140 crores, few hundred, even 1,000 incidents happening doesn't make it even 0.00 something, right? But would you agree that, which me and Amana have analyzed in this last decade, whenever any incident happens where the Muslim is the oppressor and the victim is the Hindu, the very communist portal controlled newspapers and websites will pass it off as a routine thing, will cover the names, will not. But if it happens reverse, where the victim is Muslim and the perpetrator is Hindu, then even if it's not a communal thing, they give it that communal thing. They're always waiting for it. There is a select lobby which is always waiting for it. And then there's a lot of money to be made it, because then you get foreign donors and all. There is an industry now around this whole thing.
Absolutely. And to give you one example, I mean, you talked about the communist or the leftist portal not giving it that, or not amplifying that news, not giving it that much space. That is still better. Mostly what happens is they don't even cover it, you know. So no news means that you have nowhere else to get the news from. That means that incident never happened. Whereas if that incident happened against, and a Muslim was a victim, then you amplify that news. And so it's not just a question anymore of Hindus. When Hindus are victims, it comes on page 16, column, this thing. No, it doesn't even come. And I analyzed this, that even for newspapers where you have an English newspaper and a sister Hindi newspaper, the Hindi newspaper is so much more objective. वो फिर भी ground से जुड़ा है. वो ये news देता था, but English वाला news नहीं देता था. And then you remember HT started this hate tracker, okay? And its preamble was that this is the hate tracker is tracking instances that we have collated from English newspapers. तो एक तो आप कवर ही नहीं कर रहे हो दूसरी साइड को, दूसरा आप इंग्लिश न्यूज के जो एम्पलीफाई कर रहे हो उसको कवर कर रहे हो. So obviously there is bias and there is a cottage industry, you know, no doubt about it.
Absolutely. And what would be the solution to counter that?
Solution is, I think, to make an objective hate tracker, you know, where you have, you talk about every crime that happens. Either you do that, or you accept the fact that in India, crime is happening, right? And many people say crime is religion agnostic. That's not true. I don't agree with that. You know, I think there are a lot of people who say when lynching happens, it's not on the basis of religion. No, that's not true at all. Many Muslims have been killed specifically because they were Muslim, and many Hindus have been killed specifically because they were Hindus. You know, I mean, you had that Bharat Yadav lassi sellers who was called a kafir and then killed. So many other instances like that. So it's not true that lynching and killings are religion agnostic. But if you're reporting it, then unless you're objective, then you're giving just one-sided picture, which your own hero, our own, you know, people we worship, person we worship, Ambedkar, warned us against. You know.
I think with that, we let you go. I still have a lot of questions, but this is going very long. We hope to see you more often in the future. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, for speaking your mind on everything. And we may not agree on everything, but I think that is the mark of a society which aspires to, you know, evolve better, that we agree to disagree and speak on every topic.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And we'll share the link of your latest book down, and then viewers can read that and even challenge you.
Absolutely. I would love a challenge.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Good night. Take care.